The sun cracked the earth like it was made of old porcelain. Dust floated in the air, hanging motionless, as if even the wind didn't dare move. Somewhere between silence and heat, a man fell to his knees. His name was Zé Barrento. Blood darkened his shirt, soaking into the red sash at his waist. 3 bullets had found their mark. Chest, side, shoulder, but he was still alive. Barely. In front of him stood a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7. Her dress was torn. Her knees scraped. Her small hands trembled as they clung to his arm. She didn't know who he was, only that when the gunshot started, he had leapt from the saddle like a devil born of dust, screamed at the attackers, and taken the bullets meant for her. "Don't cry," he whispered, teeth red with blood. "You're safe." Behind the rocks and the thorn bushes, the gunmen hesitated. Their orders had been clear. Kill anything that moved. But no one had expected him to be there, and certainly not to do this. Zé Barrento was not a hero. At least, not in the stories they told around the fire. He was a Cangaceiro, a bandit of the worst kind. Scarred, ruthless, hunted. Mothers spoke his name to scare children into behaving. Farmers cursed his memory for stolen cattle, burned crops, vanished sons. But those who met him face to face rarely cursed. Most never spoke again. And yet here he was, bleeding out in the dirt, protecting the daughter of the man who wanted him dead more than anything on earth. That man's name was Colonel Antônio Valverde. The colonel was a land baron, feared almost as much as Zé himself. He wore clean white suits in towns where most went barefoot. He owned more rifles than neighbors. His word, once spoken, never returned empty. And he had a hatred burning in him that could set the whole backlands on fire. Because 5 years ago, his brother was gunned down in cold blood. Witnesses said the killer wore a wide-brimmed hat and carried a silver revolver with the initials ZB carved into the handle. From that day on, Colonel Valverde swore revenge. Not justice, revenge. The kind that eats a man from the inside. He put a bounty on Zé's head so high it turned honest men into hunters. And for 5 years, he waited for the day he'd look the killer of his blood in the eyes. But fate in the backlands doesn't follow orders. That morning, Valverde's daughter Elisa had run off while playing near the edge of the property. The guards were distracted. The dogs didn't bark. She slipped through the dry grass like a spirit, and right into an ambush. It wasn't meant for her. It was meant for Zé. Someone tipped off a group of bounty hunters. Told them he'd be passing through that valley. They waited in silence, fingers on triggers, breath steady. Then came a child's scream. Zé heard it before he saw her, before the rifles raised, before anyone realized the girl didn't belong there. He could have turned back. He could have let it happen. Maybe he even should have. But something in him shifted. Maybe it was the sound. Maybe it was the way her small face twisted in terror. Or maybe, just maybe, Zé Barrento had grown tired of being the villain in everyone's story. He rode straight into the trap. Not to kill, not to fight, to save her. He grabbed the girl, dismounted, and stood between her and the rifles like a shield made of flesh and fury. "If anyone touches her," he growled, "I'll kill you all." Then came the bullets. One at his side. He didn't fall. The second tore through his shoulder. He staggered. The third, right to the chest, dropped him to his knees. But he never let go of the girl. And now, minutes later, a horse's hooves beat the earth like thunder. Colonel Valverde. He rode with fire in his heart and steel in his eyes. When he saw the scene, his daughter alive, untouched, curled into the arms of his enemy, he pulled his rifle, ready to end it all. But then he heard her voice. "Papa, he saved me." He dismounted slowly, walked across the dust, gun in hand, staring at the man bleeding before him. Zé didn't flinch. "I didn't do it for you," Zé said, his voice raw. "I did it because it was right." The colonel looked at his daughter, then back at the man he hated. "You killed my brother, outlaw. Saving her won't erase that." "I know." The silence felt thicker than the heat. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried. A dog barked. Then, without another word, Colonel Valverde holstered his gun. He picked up his daughter and walked away. No thank you. No promise. No forgiveness. Just silence. Behind him, Zé Barrento fell backward. The dust rose gently. His eyes flickered, then closed. No one expected him to survive. But legends rarely die when they're supposed to. Rain came late that year. The kind of late that cracks riverbeds and makes mothers cry in silence as they divide the last handful of beans. But in a small village far from the maps and memories of powerful men, a miracle unfolded quietly. Zé Barrento was alive. The villagers didn't know who he was. Or maybe they did, and chose not to care. He had arrived unconscious on the back of a donkey, half dead, bleeding through makeshift bandages. The old woman who nursed him said, later, she felt death walking beside him, but hadn't let it in. Weeks passed, then months. His wounds closed slowly, but pain clung to him like a jealous lover. He couldn't raise his right arm. His lungs burned when he walked too far. But his eyes, those sharp, storm-colored eyes, stayed clear. Watching, remembering. They gave him a false name. Told outsiders he was a cousin from the coast who'd fallen from a horse. And in the quiet hours of morning, Zé sat beneath a crooked tree and stared across the hills, waiting for something only he could name. He never told them who he really was. Maybe he thought it didn't matter anymore. But stories like blood have a way of spreading. One evening, a traveler arrived with a dusty guitar and a mouth full of gossip. He sang for bread and coins, and between songs, he spoke of a girl saved by a ghost, a Cangaceiro who'd taken bullets for the daughter of his worst enemy. He said the man had died that same day in a pool of his own blood. Zé listened in silence. When the song ended, he smiled faintly, not because it was funny, but because for the first time in years, he heard his own name in someone else's mouth, and it didn't come with a curse. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat outside, watching the stars, thinking about a little girl with big eyes and a father who had every reason to kill him, but didn't. And far away, in a house with tall ceilings and silence thick as wool, Colonel Antônio Valverde poured himself another glass of cachaca. He hadn't touched his rifle since that day. Elisa had changed. She didn't cry anymore. She didn't speak of the ambush or the blood. But every now and then, she'd look out the window and whisper, "I hope he's okay." Her father pretended not to hear. But the truth was, he heard her. Every time, he remembered the moment he knelt beside Zé, the weight of his daughter in his arms, the blood on the outlaw's chest, and the look in his eyes. Not defiance, not regret. Something else. Something that had haunted him every night since. Conscience. Colonel Valverde was not a man who believed in redemption. He believed in land, blood, and vengeance, in debts that could not be forgiven, and sins that had to be answered with lead. But sometimes, the backlands whisper questions even a hardened man cannot ignore. Who are you when the killing stops? What's left of a man after hate has burned through everything else? And most of all, what if your enemy becomes the only person you can't explain away? The rumors came slow, like the first drops before a storm. Whispers in taverns. Notes passed between traders. A man fitting Zé Barrento's description seen limping through a small village near the border. No weapons, no gang, just a broken man with sharp eyes and silence in his step. The colonel told himself he didn't care. But one night, he saddled his horse and rode out alone. He didn't tell his daughter, didn't leave a note. He just left. The road stretched like an old scar across the land. Dust rose beneath each hoof. Birds scattered from trees. And in the stillness between towns, memories returned like ghosts. The face of his brother, the laughter before the war, the hole that grief carved into his chest. By dawn, he reached the village. Small, poor, forgotten. He asked for water at a well and said he was looking for a man, a cousin maybe, hurt in a fall. A woman pointed to a house at the edge of the village. The colonel thanked her and walked slowly. And there, under the crooked tree, sat Zé. He didn't flinch, didn't reach for a weapon. Just watch him come. The colonel stopped a few steps away. "You came to finish what you started?" Zé asked, his voice hoarse but calm. Valverde looked at him. No rifle in hand. No soldiers at his side. Only memory. Only weight. And something neither man could name. "I no longer know who my enemy is," the colonel said. A bird cried in the distance. Zé stood slowly, unarmed, pale. He nodded once. "Maybe that's because we both became something else. They stood in silence. Two men shaped by hate, bound by a single act neither of them had ever imagined. And between them, a space filled with questions too heavy to speak aloud. The villagers watched from doorways. Children clung to mothers. No one moved, and then the colonel spoke again. "Why did you save her?" Zay looked past him at the hills, at the clouds gathering on the horizon. "I've burned a lot behind me," he said. "But that day, I saw something worth saving, and I didn't want to be the man who let it die." Valverde looked down at his boots. "I was ready to kill you," he said. "I know, but I didn't." Zay nodded again. "Because of her." The colonel sighed. Heavy, tired. "She thinks you're a hero." Zay smiled faintly. "She's wrong." "Maybe," Valverde replied. "But maybe that's what makes it matter." The wind carried the scent of coming rain. Zay stepped aside, motioning toward the small bench beneath the crooked tree. The colonel hesitated for a second, then sat. Two men who had once sworn to kill each other now sat in silence, listening to birds argue in the branches above. No guards, no witnesses, just the weight of memory between them. "Do you believe people change?" Valverde asked, eyes fixed on a distant patch of sky. Zay didn't answer right away. He reached down, picked up a worn piece of cloth, and wiped his hands slowly, more out of thought than need. "People don't change," he said finally, "but sometimes they stop lying to themselves." Valverde turned toward him. "And why did you stop telling?" Zay met his eyes. "That I had nothing left to lose." It landed like a stone in a pond. Ripples that neither of them could ignore. The colonel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You know, I told myself for 5 years that I'd put a bullet through your skull and sleep like a baby afterward. I believe you. But the day I saw you, lying there, bleeding, covering her like she was yours." He paused, shaking his head. "I didn't know what to do with that." Zay looked down at his own hands. Scarred, torn, callous from years of gripping steel and riding hard through brush and blood. "She reminded me of someone," he said. "Your daughter." Zay shook his head. "Never had one." A moment passed. "Then who?" Zay breathed in, exhaled slowly. "My sister. Long time ago. Back when I was still someone." Valverde's eyes narrowed. "What happened?" Zay gave a half-smile, bitter and tired. "I failed her. Didn't protect her when it mattered." And then, with the quiet weight of someone lifting a stone buried deep in his soul, he added, "A man killed her in front of me. I was 15. I didn't even have a knife." The colonel sat back, his posture softening. "Is that when you became a monster?" Zay finished for him. "No, that came later." They sat in the shade for a while, letting the story breathe. Around them, life carried on. Chickens pecked at the dry soil. A boy chased a goat, laughing as if the world had never known blood. The village was too poor for suspicion, too tired for hate, but its quiet offered something neither man had felt in years: stillness. Valverde looked at Zay again, more curious than hostile now. "What would you do if you were me?" he asked. "If it had been your brother, shot down like a dog?" Zay leaned forward, staring at the ground. "I'd want revenge," he said. "I'd probably hunt the bastard to the ends of the earth." He paused. "And I'd be wrong." The colonel raised an eyebrow. "Because revenge doesn't bring anything back. It just rots what's left." He gestured around them. "Look at me. I've got nothing. I don't even know why I'm still breathing. But for the first time in my life, I'm not running. I don't have to be Zé Barrento anymore. I can just be." Valverde stared at him. There was something in his eyes now that hadn't been there before. Not trust, not forgiveness, but the first fragile thread of understanding. "I don't know what to do with you," he admitted. Zay chuckled softly. "You think I know what to do with me?" They both laughed, not loud, not for long, but real. Then the colonel stood. He looked down at the man who had once been his nightmare, now pale and thin beneath the bruised bark of a tree. "I have to go back," he said. Zay nodded. Valverde turned to leave, but halfway down the path he stopped. "Elisa asks about you," he said without turning. Zay looked up. "She thinks you'll come see her one day." The outlaw said nothing. "She's too young to understand what it means to be hunted." Still, no answer. "But she dreams about you," Valverde added. Zay closed his eyes. The words cut deeper than any bullet. The colonel mounted his horse and rode off, vanishing like smoke in the heat haze. For days, Zay didn't speak to anyone. He walked the edge of the village, watched storms roll in, listened to dogs bark at distant thunder. Something inside him shifted again, not like before, not survival. This time it was something stranger. Regret. He'd carried guilt like a shadow for years. But now, for the first time, it had a face. A small face with tear-streaked cheeks and a voice that had said, "Papa, he saved me." What do you do when the only good thing you've ever done comes back to haunt you? What if your life has always been a closed book, and someone finally opens it? Days passed, then weeks. Then a letter came, carried by a boy on foot, wrapped in cloth and tied with string. No name, just a mark pressed into the wax. The family crest of the Valverde estate. Zay stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside, a simple note. "She still talks about you. She wants to know your name." Zay didn't sleep that night. He sat outside under the same tree, clutching the letter like a relic. Rain finally came, soft and slow, soaking the earth as if the land itself were crying. And for the first time since the day he was shot, Zé Barrento cried too. The rain washed the dust from the rooftops, but not the weight from Zay's shoulders. For days after the letter arrived, he drifted through the village like a man caught between two lifetimes. He helped patch roofs, sharpened tools, fed the chickens, said thank you when he remembered. But something in his steps was different now, slower, heavier, as if each one carried a memory he wasn't sure he wanted. "She wants to know your name." He read the note again each morning, as if maybe the fifth time it would say something different, as if names were something that could be rewritten once the story had already spilled so much blood. Zé Barrento. The name still meant fear in the towns beyond the hills. He'd once carved it into doors, burned it into mines. Men who said it too loudly in taverns sometimes didn't wake up the next day. But what was it now? A name that had lost its fangs? Or one still dangerous to speak aloud? He asked himself a question again and again. Could a name, even his, become something good? The village children didn't care who he'd been. To them, he was just a man who carved whistles from wood, who fixed cracked sandals with wire and glue, who sat with them during the last light of day and told stories. Never about himself. But even children see things adults miss. One girl, no older than 5, once asked him, "Why are your eyes so sad?" He couldn't answer. She kissed his cheek and said, "It's okay. Sad eyes are still good eyes." That night, he couldn't sleep. That was the moment he decided. He packed a small bag, a clean shirt, a pair of boots someone had gifted him last winter. No weapons. He left the rest behind. The hammock, the rusty tin cup, the past. Before the sun had risen, he set out. The road back to the Valverde estate was long, crossing dry fields and towns where his name still stung. But he walked it like a penance. Head low, heart open. And as he moved across the land he had once haunted, something strange happened. No one stopped him. Old men stared, but didn't speak. Shopkeepers watched from behind glass, but didn't call for help. A few recognized him, perhaps, but said nothing. Maybe because the man who passed through their streets didn't carry the weight of vengeance anymore. He looked more like a man trying to return a piece of himself he'd forgotten how to hold. By the time he reached the edges of the Valverde land, dusk had settled in. The fields were quiet, bathed in gold. Smoke rose from the kitchen chimney in slow curls. Zay stood at the gate for a long time. He remembered this place well. Years ago, he'd ridden past it at night, cursing the name that owned it. Now he stood before it like a pilgrim, unsure if he was seeking forgiveness or simply a final answer. A guard stepped out of the shadows. He reached for his weapon, then froze. "Zé Barrento." Zay raised both hands slowly. "I'm unarmed. I came to speak with the colonel." The guard stared, uncertain. "Wait here." Zay waited. 10 minutes. Then 15. Then the door opened, not from a main house, but from the side veranda. A little girl in a white dress stepped out, barefoot, eyes squinting against the fading light. Elisa. She saw him and stopped. He removed his hat. She walked toward him, slow, cautious, as if unsure whether to believe her eyes. "You're real," she whispered. He nodded. "You remember me?" Zay smiled soft. "I never forgot you." She reached out and touched his hand, the one that had once held a revolver tighter than life itself. Now it trembled. You're not like Papa says. Zay looked past her toward the house. Maybe not anymore. Then a voice cut through the moment. Firm, low, familiar. Elisa. The colonel stepped out, rifle slung, but unloaded. Not as a threat. As a reminder. She turned. Papa, it's him. He walked toward them, slower than before, the years now visible in his gait. I know. Zay looked him in the eye. I came to answer your letter. And hers. The colonel said nothing. Elisa looked between them. Is he still bad? She asked. The question wasn't meant to hurt, but it sliced through both men like a blade. Valverde crouched beside her. No, he said. Not today. Zay swallowed hard. She looked up at him. Can you stay for dinner? He hesitated. I don't think I should. Her face fell. A single wrinkle of disappointment that tore him open inside. I'm not used to places like this. Valverde straightened up. Neither am I anymore. The two men stood there, strangers joined by something that neither revenge nor forgiveness could quite name. But something happened next that neither of them expected. Elisa took Zay's hand and pulled gently. Come inside, she said. Just for tonight. Zay looked to Valverde, searching for a signal. The colonel gave a single nod. And so, for the first time in over a decade, Zé Barrento crossed the threshold of a house not to steal, or threaten, or hide, but to sit, to listen, to be seen. Inside, the walls were lined with books, old photos, oil lamps. The dining table bore scratches from years of use. It smelled of rosemary and roasted meat. Life. He sat at the far end, unsure, awkward. Elisa served him soup with hands too small for the ladle. Valverde poured drinks without speaking. They ate in silence, like survivors of a war too painful to name. But something shifted as the meal went on. Elisa giggled once, told a story about a frog that snuck into her shoe. Zay laughed, not politely, truly. Even Valverde cracked a smile. And for a brief moment, the ghosts faded. The war stilled. The backlands, for once, let the living be more than the dead they carried.